fog clung to the Ardennes forest like a burial shroud on the morning of December 23, 1944. Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt sat in the commander's cupola of his King Tiger tank, scanning the frozen landscape through frost-covered periscope lenses. Behind him, nearly 70 tons of German engineering rumbled forward at walking pace, the massive engine producing a low growl that reverberated through the snow-covered hills. For 3 days, Reinhardt's unit had been unstoppable. They had crushed American positions, scattered Sherman tanks like children's toys, and driven deep into Allied lines. The Americans had nothing that could reliably stop a King Tiger at range. Nothing. High Command had assured them of this fact repeatedly, and the burning wrecks littering the roads behind them proved it true. Yet something felt wrong this morning. Reinhardt couldn't explain the sensation. The forest ahead looked peaceful. Frost clung to bare branches. A thin layer of fog hung over the valley, beautiful in its way. His King Tiger sat like a steel fortress on tracks, its 180 millimeters of frontal armor rendering it effectively immune to American guns. The 88 millimeter cannon could destroy enemy tanks at distances where they couldn't even see his vehicle properly. He should have felt safe. Invincible, even. Instead, his stomach tightened with unease. 2 miles away, hidden on a ridge that Reinhardt couldn't see through the morning fog, Sergeant David Morrison crouched inside a vehicle that looked nothing like the heavy tank the German commander feared. The M36 Jackson tank destroyer had arrived from the factory just 24 hours earlier. Its armor was thin enough that even a near miss from artillery shrapnel could wound the crew. The turret had no roof, meaning snow, rain, and enemy fire could fall directly inside. Morrison was 28 years old, a mechanic from Cleveland, who had learned precision from his father in an automotive garage. He had promised his mother he would come home alive from this war. That promise felt very fragile right now. Next to him sat Corporal James Parker, 22, from Detroit. Parker had taught himself ballistics from library books after his brother Bobby died in a Sherman tank at Normandy. Bobby's last letter home haunted Parker still. "We never had a chance. Their guns outrange us. Find a way to hit them from farther away. That's the only way to survive." Parker had spent 4 months calculating how to do exactly that. Now he would find out if mathematics could defeat 70 tons of German steel. Private Tommy Walsh, 19 years old and fresh from an Iowa farm, struggled to load a 43-pound artillery shell with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His older brother Michael had died at Anzio 3 months ago. Tommy had enlisted against his parents' wishes, determined to finish what Michael started, but sitting in this thin-skinned vehicle waiting to engage the most feared tank in the German arsenal, Tommy wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. None of them knew that in the next 3 minutes they would change the course of the Battle of the Bulge. Morrison had been studying terrain maps by candlelight since 0530 hours, applying the same methodical thinking his father had taught him in the garage. When you need to lift a heavy engine, you don't use brute force. You use leverage, distance. You make physics work for you, not against you. The King Tiger's strength was its armor at close range, but armor didn't help if you couldn't shoot back. The M36's 90mm gun could, according to the technical specifications Parker had memorized, penetrate a King Tiger's side armor at 2,500 yards, maybe farther with the right ammunition and perfect calculations. 2,500 yards was nearly a mile and a half, far beyond anything in standard tank destroyer doctrine. The training manual said engage at 500 to 800 yards, close enough to guarantee hits, close enough to see the whites of the enemy's eyes, close enough to die. Morrison had watched his former Sherman crew die that way 4 days ago. Good men burned alive because they had to get close enough for their guns to work. Jake Sullivan, his best man at his wedding, screaming as flames consumed him. Eddie Reese from Cleveland, 3 houses down from Morrison's childhood home, cut down by machine gun fire as he tried to escape the burning tank. Morrison had vomited, watching it happen. He still saw it every time he closed his eyes. That wouldn't happen today. Not if Parker's calculations were correct. Not if they could kill the enemy from distances the Germans thought were impossible. Parker checked his rangefinder for the 10th time. 2,820 yards to the King Tiger that had just emerged from the morning fog, outside the effective range where the German could accurately return fire. Well, within the theoretical maximum range of the 90mm gun, provided every variable was calculated perfectly. Wind speed, 7 miles per hour left to right. Temperature, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, affecting powder burn rate and air density. Target movement, approximately 4 miles per hour forward. Elevation advantage from the ridge position, 200 feet above valley floor. Flight time at this range, approximately 3.4 seconds. Parker's hands moved through the calculations he had practiced 1,000 times. Elevation, 14.2 degrees. Windage correction, 2.8 mils left. Lead the target 11 feet to compensate for its forward movement during shell flight time. His notebook filled with hand-drawn ballistics tables and range cards for every 50-yard increment from 2,000 to 3,000 yards lay open on his lap. Next to it, Bobby's photo, the same photo Bobby had carried into Normandy and never came back from. Parker's father had told him once that revenge was a poison. But this wasn't revenge. This was a promise. Bobby had begged him to find a way to hit the enemy from farther away. Parker had found that way. Now he just had to prove it worked. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Lieutenant Hayes, their platoon leader, issued clear orders. All M36 units hold positions. Do not engage without my direct command. We need to coordinate fire on the German column. Morrison acknowledged the order. Then he raised his binoculars and saw what the King Tiger was targeting. In the valley below, American infantry huddled in foxholes. Beyond them, a small farmhouse with a white flag hanging from the window. Belgian civilians trapped by the fighting, hoping the white flag would save them. The King Tiger's turret was turning toward that area, the long barrel of its 88mm gun elevated slowly, targeting the farmhouse and the American positions below it. Morrison had perhaps 30 seconds to make a decision. He could obey Hayes's order and wait for coordination. Standard procedure, safe procedure, the procedure that kept you out of courts-martial. Or he could authorize Parker to take a shot that nobody in the history of armored warfare had successfully made in combat, a shot at a range that training manuals said was impossible, a shot that if it missed would reveal their position and bring down German artillery that would kill them all. Morrison thought of Jake Sullivan burning, Eddie Reese dying, his promise to come home alive, his promise to keep his men safe. He thought of those civilians in the farmhouse, those infantry in the foxholes, all of them about to die because he was waiting for permission. Morrison made his choice. Parker, can you make this shot? Parker's hand stopped shaking, his breathing slowed. He entered the mental state he'd practiced for months where everything became numbers and physics. Nothing existed except the mathematics of ballistics. Range, 2,820 yards. Math says yes, Sarge. Morrison turned to Walsh. The kid was pale, terrified, barely holding it together. Walsh, load, HVAP. The high-velocity armor. Piercing round was one of only 12 they possessed, courtesy of an ordnance sergeant who had lost family to German tanks. Each one was precious. Each one represented a chance to kill the machines that had slaughtered American tank crews for months. Walsh's hands shook as he hefted the 43-pound shell. He had loaded 100 practice rounds in training, but this was different. This was real. If he fumbled now, if he dropped it, if he loaded it wrong, people died. Up, Walsh managed, his voice cracking. Parker adjusted the gun, with movements so precise they seemed mechanical. 14.2 degrees elevation, 2.8 mils, windage left. His eye pressed against the gun sight. The King Tiger filled his vision, massive and threatening even at this distance. For a moment, Parker saw Bobby's face, saw his brother burning in a Sherman that couldn't reach the enemy that killed it, saw the letter telling him to find a way to fight from farther away. Bobby, guide this one, Parker whispered. On the way. The 90mm gun fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. The sound was different from the deeper boom of German 88mm guns. Higher pitched, angrier, the M36 Jackson rocked backward 8 inches from recoil. Parker absorbed the impact with his shoulder, keeping his eye fixed on the target through the gun sight. Morrison counted in his head, 1, 2, 3. The shell flew for 3.4 seconds. Inside the King Tiger, Hauptmann Reinhardt had no idea death was approaching at 2,800 feet per second. His gunner was adjusting aim on the farmhouse. His loader was preparing the next round. The radio operator was reporting their position to battalion headquarters. None of them heard the American shell coming. The impact struck just below the turret ring with a metallic clang that sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the penetration occurred. The armor-piercing round punched through at the weakest point where turret met hull. Inside the King Tiger, the German gunner screamed as shrapnel tore into his legs. The fire suppression system ruptured, filling the crew compartment with chemical foam. Smoke poured from the impact point. The massive tank shuddered to a stop. Reinhardt couldn't process what had happened. They had been hit from somewhere, but where he scanned the horizon frantically through his periscope, nothing visible at normal engagement ranges. No enemy tanks within 1,000 yards, yet they had been hit hard enough to disable the turret rotation mechanism. Morrison watched through binoculars as the King Tiger attempted to reverse, trying to retreat from an enemy it couldn't see. The reversal exposed the tank's rear armor, weaker than the front, 80 millimeters instead of 180. Parker was already calculating the adjustment for a moving target. Reload, Morrison ordered. Walsh, adrenaline overcoming fear, now loaded the second HVAP round in record time. Up, Parker adjusted for the King Tiger's reverse speed. 4 miles per hour backward meant he needed to lead the target forward counterintuitively, compensate 11 feet ahead of current position. The shell would arrive exactly where the tank would be in 3.3 seconds. On the way. The second round flew true. It struck the King Tiger's rear armor and penetrated completely. Inside the shell hit the ammunition storage. What happened next was catastrophic. The King Tiger's ammunition cooked off in a series of rapid explosions. Each 88mm round detonated inside the crew compartment. The turret, weighing several tons, was blown completely off the hull. It tumbled through the air and landed 30 feet away, upside down in the snow. Fire and smoke poured from the destroyed vehicle. Secondary explosions continued for 10 seconds as remaining ammunition detonated, then silence. Morrison, Parker, and Walsh sat frozen for a moment, unable to believe what they had just accomplished. They had killed a king tiger at 2,820 yards, almost exactly a mile and a half, a distance that wasn't supposed to be possible. In the valley below, American infantry emerged from their foxholes, cheering. The civilians in the farmhouse waved the white flag, frantically crying with relief. Morrison's radio erupted with chatter. Who the hell just saved our asses? That was over a mile away. Then Lieutenant Hayes's voice, sharp with anger and confusion. Morrison, you just violated a direct order. Explain yourself immediately. Morrison grabbed the radio, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Sir, there were civilians in the line of fire. Corporal Parker identified the threat, and I authorized engagement. Corporal Parker, your gunner made that shot. Yes, sir. Range 2,820 yards, 2 shots, 2 hits, target destroyed. The radio went silent for 3 long seconds. Morrison could imagine Hayes processing this information. 2,800 yards was beyond anything in the tactical manuals. It was beyond what anyone thought the M36 gun could accomplish in combat conditions. 2,800 yards, Morrison, that's impossible. Morrison looked at Parker, who was staring at his shaking hands, still unable to believe the mathematics had worked. Confirmed kill, sir. Parker calculated ballistics perfectly. The civilians are safe. Infantry is safe. Hayes' voice changed. The anger disappeared, replaced by something like awe. Holy shit. Do you realize what you just did? Nobody's ever made a tank kill at that range. Not in training, not ever. Parker touched Bobby's photo in his wallet. I kept my promise, he whispered to the image. Hayes' voice returned to urgency. Good work, Morrison. But displace now before their artillery finds you. Morrison heard the incoming shells before he saw them. The distinctive whistle of German 105mm artillery vectoring in on the gun signature from their shots. Driver reverse. Go. The M36's engine roared. The vehicle reversed rapidly behind the ridge just as the first artillery shells impacted exactly where they had been positioned 15 seconds earlier. Massive explosions tore the earth apart. Shrapnel whined through the air where Morrison's crew would have been if they had hesitated. They made it behind the ridge with seconds to spare. The crew sat breathing hard, processing what they had survived. Walsh threw up over the side of the turret. The adrenaline crash hit him hard. Morrison put a hand on the kid's shoulder. You did good, Tommy. First combat and you kept loading under fire. That's all anyone can ask. Parker was still staring at his notebook at the calculations that had worked perfectly. The mathematics of death refined over months of library research and obsessive practice. I can't believe it worked, he said quietly. I calculated it 1,000 times, but I didn't know if it would actually work in combat. Morrison looked at his gunner, this 22-year-old kid from Detroit who had just changed the nature of armored warfare with a notebook and a slide rule. It worked, Parker. You just proved this gun can kill king tigers from ranges they thought were safe. Do you understand what that means? Parker understood. Bobby had died because the Sherman couldn't reach the Panther that killed it. Parker had just killed a king tiger from nearly 2 miles away. Distance as armor, mathematics as a weapon. The rules had changed. 3 miles away, at German regimental headquarters, Oberst Franz Steiner was receiving reports that made no sense. A king tiger destroyed at extreme range by an unknown weapon. The crew reported being engaged from at least 2 kilometers, possibly farther. They never saw the enemy, never heard the gun until the shell arrived. Steiner studied the tactical maps. American Shermans couldn't make those shots. American tank destroyers, the M10 and M18 models, lacked the gunpowder for extreme range kills. Intelligence had reported no new heavy American tanks in this sector. Yet 7 King Tigers had been destroyed in the past 72 hours, all at extreme range, all by invisible enemies. Steiner made a decision that would slow the entire German offensive. All King Tiger units would advance with mandatory infantry screens, no movement without artillery preparation, maximum caution in open terrain. Every hour of delay gave the Allies time to regroup, time to bring up reinforcements, time for the weather to clear and Allied air power to return. Morrison's crew had just bought that time with 2 perfect shots. By afternoon, they had repositioned to a temporary location 3 miles from the engagement site. Morrison studied his crew. Walsh was still pale hands shaking as he tried to eat cold rations. Parker sat with his notebook open, already refining his calculations based on the morning's combat data. An ordnance sergeant named O'Brien approached carrying a wooden crate. Morrison recognized the man from previous supply runs, but had never spoken with him directly. Morrison. Heard what you boys did this morning. News travels fast, Morrison replied carefully. O'Brien opened the crate, revealing 12 HVA-P rounds with distinctive black tips, 2,820 yards. I've been in this army 20 years, and I never heard of a tank kill that far. These were supposed to go to Patton's boys, but I figure you'll put them to better use. Sergeant, we can't take those without authorization. O'Brien's weathered face showed no humor. You can and you will. Just don't tell anyone where you got them. My nephew died at Normandy in a Sherman. Got hit before he could even fire. What you boys did today, that's what we needed 6 months ago. The sergeant turned to Parker. Kill some more of those King Tigers for my nephew. Parker met the older man's eyes. I will, Sergeant, I promise. After O'Brien left, Morrison examined the HVAP rounds. They were worth more than gold in current tactical situations. Each one represented a chance to kill a tank that had been slaughtering American crews for months. Parker was already recalculating his range tables. HVAP rounds had 15% higher muzzle velocity than standard armor-piercing ammunition. Every calculation in his notebook needed adjustment. This changes everything, Parker said, running numbers. With HVAP, I can reach out to 3,000 yards, maybe farther. Morrison watched his gunner work, seeing the obsessive focus that had made Parker the second highest scoring gunner in his training battalion. This wasn't just about killing tanks. This was about keeping a promise to a dead brother. Walsh finished vomiting and sat down heavily. Sarge, can I ask you something? Morrison nodded. You disobeyed a direct order. Aren't you worried about getting in trouble? Morrison was quiet for a moment, thinking about the civilians in that farmhouse, the infantry in those foxholes, Jake Sullivan burning. I'm more worried about good people dying when I could have saved them. Hayes is a good officer. He'll understand. And if he doesn't, well, I'd rather face a court-martial than tell those families I could have saved them, but I waited for permission. Parker looked up from his calculations. Sarge, we just proved this gun can kill king tigers at ranges where they can't fight back. If we teach other crews this method, we could change how this whole battle is fought. Morrison understood immediately. It wasn't about thicker armor or bigger guns. It was about using distance and mathematics as weapons, about turning the tables on an enemy that had terrorized American tank crews for months. First, we have to prove it wasn't luck. We need to do it again. The radio crackled. Hayes wanted them back at battalion headquarters for debriefing, but his tone had changed. The anger about insubordination was gone, replaced by urgent curiosity. Morrison, I need you to explain to the battalion commander how the hell you just killed a king tiger from farther away than anyone thought possible. As their M36 rumbled toward headquarters, Morrison reflected on what they had accomplished. One kill didn't prove a doctrine, one success didn't change a war, but it was a start. Parker sat quietly, touching Bobby's photo. The mathematics had worked, the promise was being kept, but there would be more king tigers, more chances to prove that distance and precision could defeat brute force. Walsh had stopped shaking. The initial terror of combat was fading, replaced by a grim understanding. This was what war actually meant, not glory or adventure, but mathematics and terror, and trying not to die while doing your job. The M36 Jackson represented a new philosophy, not standing and trading blows with heavier enemy armor, not charging forward aggressively, but using intelligence, calculation, and extreme range to kill the enemy before they knew you existed. Ghost guns, the Germans would start calling them, invisible weapons that killed from impossible distances. Morrison liked that description. Ghosts didn't fight fair. Ghosts didn't follow rules. Ghosts just killed and disappeared. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds as they drove toward headquarters. In the distance, smoke still rose from the destroyed King Tiger, a monument to the fact that invincibility was an illusion, that every strength had a weakness, that sometimes a thin-skinned vehicle with a brilliant gunner was deadlier than 70 tons of armor. Morrison's crew had fired 2 shots that morning, 2 kills. Perfect accuracy at a range that wasn't supposed to be possible. The ghosts had learned to kill, and the Germans had no defense against an enemy they couldn't see. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold and bitter. Morrison woke at 0500 hours to Lieutenant Hayes kicking his boot breath visible in the freezing air inside the tent they had requisitioned from an abandoned Belgian farmhouse. Up! We're moving. Morrison sat up immediately, years of military discipline overriding the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. Around him, Parker and Walsh stirred from sleep that had been fitful at best. None of them had slept well since the first King Tiger kill yesterday. The adrenaline crash, combined with the knowledge that they would have to do it again soon, made rest nearly impossible. Hayes spread a map across the makeshift table, his face illuminated by a single kerosene lamp. The flickering light made the terrain features dance and shift, giving the whole scene an unreal quality. German heavy armor spotted moving toward key crossroads south of Bastogne. 2 M36s, yours and mine, assigned to Overlook Valley near Cibray. Infantry support minimal. They're stretched thin across the entire line. Morrison studied the map, his mechanic's mind already calculating angles and distances. The valley near Cibray offered excellent sightlines, but limited cover. If German artillery found them, retreat options would be constrained by the terrain. What's our ammunition situation? Hayes grimaced. 4 HVAP rounds left. Rest standard armor piercing. Use the HVAP on King Tigers only. Everything else gets standard AP. Parker spoke up from where he sat, updating his ballistics notebook by candlelight, having woken the moment Hayes entered. How many King Tigers are we expecting? Sir Hayes met the young gunner's eyes. Intelligence says at least 2, possibly 4. Plus Panthers and lighter armor, you'll be outnumbered and outgunned if they get close. Morrison understood the implication. Distance wasn't just an advantage anymore, it was survival. Let the enemy close to standard engagement ranges, and the thin-skinned M36 would be obliterated. We'll engage from maximum range, hit them before they know we're there, then displace before their artillery responds. responds. Hayes nodded approval. That's why I'm sending you Morrison. Yesterday proved you understand how to use this weapon properly, but understand something else. The Germans are adapting. They're moving more cautiously now. They know something's out there killing their heavy armor from extreme range. They just don't know what. That gives us an edge, Morrison said. Confusion is almost as valuable as surprise. Hayes rolled up the map, move out in 30 minutes, and Morrison, no more unauthorized shots. I'm giving you tactical discretion to engage when you see fit, but keep me informed. Understood. Understood, sir. After Hayes left the crew, prepared in silence. Walsh loaded their gear with mechanical efficiency, his farm boy strength making the heavy ammunition crates seem manageable despite their weight. Parker checked and rechecked his rangefinder, his movements precise and methodical. Morrison watched them work, feeling the weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. Yesterday's success had proven the concept. Today would determine if it could be replicated, if Parker's calculations held up under repeated stress, if Walsh could keep loading under fire. The drive to Cibre took 90 minutes through roads, clogged with refugees and retreating Allied units. The sight of American soldiers falling back still shocked Morrison despite 4 days of the German offensive. These were veteran units, battle-hardened men who had fought from Normandy to the German border. Seeing them retreat spoke volumes about how badly the opening days of the Bulge had gone. They passed a column of Sherman tanks, or what remained of one. 5 burned-out hulks sat abandoned by the roadside, their crews either dead or evacuated. Morrison recognized the unit markings, 3rd Armored Division, his old unit, the crews he had served with before transferring to tank destroyers. He forced himself not to look too closely at the bodies still visible in some of the hatches. By 0930 hours, they had positioned on the ridge overlooking the valley near Cibre. Morrison selected a hull-down position that allowed maximum visibility while minimizing their exposure. Parker immediately began creating range cards, measuring distances to key terrain features with his rangefinder. Church steeple, 2,400 yards. Burned out barn, 2,650. Road junction, 2,720. Each measurement went into Parker's notebook alongside wind speed estimates, temperature readings, and elevation calculations. The notebook had become almost sacred to the young gunner, a physical manifestation of the mathematics that kept them alive. Hayes positioned his M36 200 yards to their left, creating overlapping fields of fire. The 2 tank destroyers represented the entire American anti-armor capability in this sector. If they failed, the road to Bastogne lay open. The wait began. Morrison had learned during his time in armored units that combat was 90% waiting and 10% terror. The waiting was almost worse. Time to think about everything that could go wrong. Time to imagine the shell that would find them. Time to question every decision. Walsh sat with his back against the turret wall, trying to control his breathing. Morrison recognized the signs of pre-combat anxiety. The kid was holding together, but barely. You doing okay? Tommy Walsh nodded, not trusting his voice. It's all right to be scared. I'm scared every time. The trick is doing your job anyway. My brother wasn't scared, Walsh said quietly. Michael was never scared of anything. Morrison chose his words carefully. Your brother was probably terrified. He just didn't show it. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing your duty anyway. Parker spoke without looking up from his calculations. My brother told me in his letters he was scared every single day, but he kept doing his job because his crew depended on him. Walsh absorbed this information, seeming to draw strength from knowing that fear was universal. At 10:15 hours, Parker spotted movement. Contact. Valley floor, 11 o'clock, multiple vehicles. Morrison raised his binoculars. Through the morning haze, he could see a German column moving with careful discipline. 2 King Tigers in the lead turrets traversing, constantly scanning for threats. Behind them, 3 Panthers and several Panzer IVs. Infantry riding on the tank decks, a practice that indicated the Germans were now afraid of ambushes. The entire column moved slowly, cautiously, nothing like the aggressive advance of 3 days ago. Hayes had been right. The Germans were adapting to the threat they didn't understand. Morrison keyed his radio. Hayes Morrison. Multiple targets. 2 King Tigers, 3 Panthers, lighter armor, range 2720 yards. Hayes' voice came back steady, confirmed visual. Morrison, you take the lead. King Tiger, I'll take the second. Fire on your command. After the shot, we displace immediately. Morrison turned to his crew. Parker, lead King Tiger, range 2720. Call it when you're ready. Parker's hands moved through the familiar ritual, checking wind speed with a wetted finger held outside the turret, noting air temperature from the thermometer attached to his rangefinder, calculating drop drift and lead for a target moving at approximately 5 miles per hour. The mathematics were more complex than yesterday. The target was moving, not stationary. The range was shorter, but the wind had picked up to 12 miles per hour, quartering from the right. Each variable had to be accounted for, or the shot would miss. Range 2720, wind 12 miles per hour, quartering right, target speed 5 miles per hour. Temperature 26 degrees. Parker paused, running final calculations in his head. Elevation 13.8 degrees. Windage 3.2 mils left. Lead 14 feet. Morrison watched the German column. The lead King Tiger was buttoned up, hatches closed, crew invisible inside their steel fortress. They had no idea death was being calculated less than 2 miles away. Walsh load HVAP. The young loader hefted the 43-pound shell, his movements smoother now than yesterday. Muscle memory was building despite his fear. Up. Parker made final adjustments to the gun. His breathing slowed, his hands steadied. Morrison recognized the signs of a trained marksman entering the zone where nothing existed except the target and the mathematics of ballistics. On my mark, Morrison said into the radio. 3, 2, 1 mark. Parker fired. Hayes's M36 fired simultaneously from 200 yards away. 2 shells flew across the valley at 2,800 feet per second. Morrison counted the flight time, knowing that in approximately 3.3 seconds they would discover if Parker's calculations remained accurate under different conditions than yesterday. The lead King Tiger took Parker's round just below the turret ring, nearly identical to yesterday's hit. The penetration was partial but devastating. The turret rotation mechanism jammed. Smoke poured from the impact point. Inside, the German crew would be wounded, disoriented, fighting to regain control of their damaged vehicle. Hayes's shot struck the second King Tiger perfectly in the side armor as the German tank began turning toward the ridge, finally reacting to the threat. The penetration was complete. Ammunition detonated inside the crew compartment. The explosion was massive, visible for miles, a rolling fireball that consumed the entire vehicle. The German column dissolved into chaos. Infantry leaped from the tank decks, scrambling for cover in the snow. The Panthers scattered, firing blindly toward the ridgeline. Their shells fell 400 yards short, impacting harmlessly in the valley floor. The Panzer IVs reversed frantically, trying to retreat from an enemy they couldn't locate. Parker was already adjusting for his second shot. The lead King Tiger turret jammed and, unable to rotate its gun, was attempting to reverse. The reversal exposed its rear armor, the weakest point on the entire vehicle. Target reversing 6 miles per hour. Adjusting lead. The second shot flew true. It struck the King Tiger's rear armor and penetrated completely into the engine compartment. The engine exploded, fuel ignited. Within seconds, the entire rear of the tank was engulfed in flames. The German crew bailed out uniforms, smoking rolling in the snow to extinguish flames that had caught on their clothing. Hayes displaced now, Morrison ordered into the radio. Both M36s reversed behind the ridge just as German artillery began landing. The Germans had learned from yesterday. Their artillery response was faster, better coordinated. Shells impacted with terrifying accuracy on the positions the Americans had occupied 30 seconds earlier, but 30 seconds was enough. Both tank destroyers were behind cover when the barrage arrived. Shrapnel whined overhead, deadly but ineffective against targets that were no longer there. Morrison's crew was breathing hard, adrenaline surging through their systems. Walsh looked shaken but kept it together. Parker was updating his notebook, recording the engagement parameters for future reference. 2 for 2, Morrison said. Parker, your calculations are holding up. The math works, Parker replied simply. Physics doesn't change. But something had changed in the engagement. Morrison had noticed it during the chaos. The German infantry had abandoned the tanks much faster than yesterday. The Panthers had scattered rather than forming a coordinated defense. The entire German response spoke of fear and confusion. Hayes's voice came over the radio. Morrison, good shooting. We're relocating 400 yards north. Follow when clear. As they repositioned, Morrison reflected on what they had accomplished. 4 King Tigers destroyed in 2 days, both engagements at ranges exceeding 2,700 yards, 0 American losses in return. The mathematics of warfare were shifting. For months, German heavy armor had dominated because it could kill American tanks before they could effectively fight back. Now that equation had reversed. The M36 properly employed could kill King Tigers before they even knew they were in danger. But Morrison understood something that worried him. The Germans were learning. They were adapting, moving more cautiously, demanding infantry screens, calling artillery faster. Eventually, they would figure out the tactic and develop countermeasures. The window of advantage wouldn't last forever. By mid-afternoon, they had repositioned to a new overwatch position. Hayes called both crews together for a brief meeting, gathering them in a shell-damaged barn that offered some protection from the bitter wind. The battalion commander wants to see you, Hayes told Morrison and Parker, specifically you, Parker. Word about your shooting has reached headquarters. Parker looked uncomfortable with the attention. I just do the math, sir. Hayes shook his head. You're doing more than math, Corporal. You're changing how we fight this war. Command wants to understand your methodology so we can teach it to other crews. Morrison felt a surge of protective concern for his gunner. Parker was brilliant with calculations, but socially awkward, uncomfortable with authority, still processing his brother's death through the lens of ballistics and revenge. Sir Parker's methods are complex. It's not something you can teach in an afternoon. Hayes met Morrison's eyes, understanding the subtext. I know, but we have to try. We've got 4 M36 in this battalion. If all 4 crews could shoot like Parker, we could stop this German offensive cold. That evening, back at battalion headquarters, Morrison and Parker stood before Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harris, the battalion commander. Harris was 45, a veteran of North Africa and Italy, a career officer who had seen enough combat to respect results over protocol. Harris studied Parker with open curiosity. Corporal, I've reviewed the after-action reports from both engagements. 4 kills at ranges exceeding 2,700 yards. Perfect accuracy so far. Those are numbers I didn't think were possible outside of controlled testing ranges. Parker stood at attention, visibly uncomfortable. The gun is capable of those ranges, sir. The ballistics tables prove it. You just have to account for all the variables. Harris leaned back in his chair. I have 3 other M36 crews in this battalion. Their gunners are qualified, experienced men. None of them are making shots beyond 1,500 yards. What are you doing differently? Parker glanced at Morrison, seeking support. Morrison nodded encouragement. I pre-calculate everything, sir. I have range cards for every 50 yards from 2,000 to 3,000 yards, wind corrections for different speeds, temperature adjustments, movement compensation tables. Before I engage, I already know exactly what the elevation and windage should be for that specific range and conditions. You memorized all of that. No, sir. I wrote it down. Parker pulled out his notebook, now worn and stained from 2 days of combat. He opened it to show pages covered in hand-drawn ballistics tables, range cards, and mathematical formulas. Harris examined the notebook with growing respect. How long did this take you to create? 4 months, sir. Since my brother died at Normandy. He was killed by a German tank that his Sherman couldn't reach. I decided I would never have that problem. Harris was quiet for a moment, understanding the personal motivation behind the mathematical precision. Can you teach this to other gunners? Parker hesitated. The math isn't hard if you understand the principles, but it takes practice. You have to develop an intuitive feel for how the variables interact. Wind and temperature and range all affect each other. You can't just memorize numbers. You have to understand the physics. How long to train a gunner to your level? Honestly, sir, months, maybe longer. I've been studying ballistics since I was 16. I taught myself from library books because I couldn't afford engineering school. Harris absorbed this. The tactical implications clear. They couldn't replicate Parker's expertise quickly, but they could try to spread the methodology. All right, here's what we're going to do. Parker, you're going to conduct a training session tomorrow morning for all our M36 gunners. Show them your methods. Even if they can't achieve your level of precision, any improvement helps. Harris turned to Morrison. And Sergeant, I'm authorizing you to engage at your tactical discretion. No more waiting for coordination orders. You see a target, you judge the situation, you make the call. The insubordination from yesterday is officially overlooked given the results. Morrison felt relief wash over him. Thank you, sir. Harris stood, signaling the meeting's end. Gentlemen, you've given us a weapon that can fight back against the King Tigers. That's worth more than gold right now. Use it well. That night, Morrison found Parker sitting alone outside their tent, staring at Bobby's photo by the light of a small candle. The young gunner looked exhausted, emotionally drained. Morrison sat down beside him. You did good today, Jimmy. Parker didn't respond immediately. I killed people today. Maybe a dozen men between both tanks. Morrison chose his words carefully. You saved a lot more than you killed. Those King Tigers were heading toward Bastogne. If they'd gotten through, how many American soldiers would have died? How many civilians? Parker turned the photo over in his hands. Bobby used to say that every death diminishes us, that we should remember the humanity of the people we kill, even when killing them is necessary. Parker was quiet for a long moment. I dream about them sometimes, the German crews, wonder if they had brothers, families waiting for them. Morrison understood. He had similar thoughts about Jake Sullivan and Eddie Reese, about all the men who had died in this war on both sides, caught in machines larger than themselves. They probably did, but they were also trying to kill us, and they would have killed those Belgian civilians yesterday without hesitation. You can acknowledge their humanity and still know that stopping them was the right thing to do. Walsh approached, carrying 3 cups of coffee, or what passed for coffee, in the field. He handed them out and sat down. Overheard the colonel wants you to teach the other gunners tomorrow, Walsh said to Parker. Parker nodded. I'll try, but I don't know if they can learn it fast enough to matter. Morrison sipped the terrible coffee, grateful for the warmth, if not the taste. Even if they can't match your precision, getting them to think about extreme range engagement changes everything. Makes them less likely to close to suicidal ranges, trying to get guaranteed hits. The 3 men sat in companionable silence, watching the distant flashes of artillery on the horizon. Somewhere out there, the Battle of the Bulge continued. Men were dying, tanks were burning, the outcome remained uncertain. But for the first time since December 16th, American tank crews had a weapon that could fight German heavy armor on something approaching equal terms. Parker closed his notebook and tucked Bobby's photo back into his wallet. Tomorrow we teach them. Tomorrow we make more ghost guns. Walsh raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To the ghost guns. May the Germans never see us coming. They touched cups in the freezing darkness, 3 ordinary men who had stumbled into changing the course of a battle through mathematics precision and desperate courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More King Tigers, more calculations, more lives, depending on Parker's ability to turn physics into death at impossible ranges. But tonight they had survived another day. 4 more King Tigers destroyed, 4 more proofs that invincibility was an illusion. The ghosts were learning to hunt, and Christmas Eve would test whether their methods could be taught to others before the window of advantage closed forever. Christmas morning arrived with snow falling softly over the Ardennes, covering the battlefield in deceptive beauty. Morrison woke to find Walsh already up standing guard while Parker slept fitfully beside the M36. The kid had changed in the 3 days since their first engagement. The nervous farm boy had been replaced by something harder, more focused. Combat did that. It burned away everything except what was essential for survival. Morrison joined Walsh at the observation post, accepting a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like motor oil and gratitude. Quiet night, Walsh reported, some artillery in the distance, but nothing close. Morrison studied the valley below through binoculars. The burned-out wrecks of yesterday's King Tigers sat where they had died, monuments to the new reality of armored warfare. German recovery crews would normally have retrieved them by now, but the threat of long-range American fire had made such operations too dangerous. The Germans were learning to fear what they couldn't see. By 0800 hours, Hayes had assembled all 4 M36 crews for Parker's training session. The other gunners were experienced men, veterans of earlier campaigns, but none had achieved anything close to Parker's extreme range accuracy. They gathered in the ruins of a barn, stamping their feet against the cold, skeptical expressions barely concealed. Morrison watched Parker stand before them, notebook in hand, looking more like a nervous college student than a combat veteran who had killed 6 King Tigers in 3 days. The young corporal cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention. "Gentlemen, my name is Corporal James Parker. I'm going to show you how to engage targets at ranges beyond what the training manuals consider effective." One of the veteran gunners, Corporal Davis from Kentucky, spoke up. "With respect, Parker, you're what, 22? How long you been in combat?" 3 days, Parker admitted. The skepticism in the room became palpable. Davis continued, "I've been shooting tanks since North Africa, killed 17 German vehicles. You're going to tell me I've been doing it wrong?" Parker met his eyes directly. "I'm not saying you've been doing it wrong. I'm saying the M36 gives us capabilities we haven't been exploiting. Your 17 kills. What was your average engagement range?" Davis paused, calculating. "Maybe 600 yards, 800 at most. And how many times did you take return fire during those engagements?" "Every single time. Lost 2 vehicles and 8 men doing it." Parker's voice remained steady, factual. "In the last 3 days, my crew has killed 6 King Tigers at an average range of 2,700 yards. We've taken 0 casualties, 0 damage to our vehicle. The Germans never saw us, never knew where we were, never returned effective fire." The room went quiet. Morrison saw the shift happening. The veterans were still skeptical, but now they were listening. Parker opened his notebook. "The secret isn't courage or experience, it's mathematics. At 2,700 yards, most of the German guns can't hit us reliably, but with proper calculation, we can hit them. Distance becomes our armor." He spent the next hour walking them through his methodology: range cards for every 50 yards, wind correction tables, temperature compensation formulas, movement-led calculations. The veterans took notes, asked questions, began to understand the systematic approach that Parker had developed, but understanding the theory and executing it under fire were entirely different things. By mid-morning, intelligence reported a massive German column assembling near Marsh. 4 King Tigers, 6 Panthers, 8 Panzer IVs, infantry support vehicles. It was the largest concentration of armor the Germans had sent toward this sector since the offensive began. Hayes called Morrison and Parker to his command post. The map showed the German force moving toward a narrow valley that offered perfect ambush terrain. "This is it," Hayes said grimly. "If that column breaks through, they reach Marsh by nightfall, 4,000 civilians trapped there. We're the only anti-tank capability in position to stop them." Morrison studied the map, calculating angles and distances. The terrain offered excellent firing positions, but limited escape routes. If the Germans brought their artillery to bear, quickly withdrawal would be dangerous. What's our support?" 1 platoon of infantry, 30 men, no artillery available. It's all committed to Bastogne. No air support weather still socked in. Morrison looked at Hayes. "So it's 2 M36 against that entire column." Hayes nodded. "Davis and Williams are bringing their vehicles. They've been studying Parker's methods, but they're not ready. They haven't had time to practice." Morrison made the decision. "We'll take lead positions. Davis and Williams can provide supporting fire if needed, but Parker and I will handle the heavy armor." Hayes clasped Morrison's shoulder. "If you can break that column, you'll save 4,000 people. No pressure." The dark humor landed. Morrison managed a tired smile. "Just another day at the office, sir." By 1400 hours, they were in position. Morrison had selected a ridge that offered sight lines exceeding 3,000 yards to the valley floor below. It was the most advantageous position he had ever occupied, but also the most exposed. If German counter-battery fire located them, they would have perhaps 45 seconds to escape. Parker was already creating range cards. His movement's automatic now. Walsh loaded ammunition stacking shells within easy reach. The tension was different than previous engagements. Higher stakes, Longer odds, more variables beyond their control. Morrison watched through binoculars as the German column appeared in the valley. The sight was intimidating even at extreme range. 4 King Tigers led the formation, moving with the careful discipline of experienced crews. Behind them, the Panthers in lighter armor followed in textbook tactical spacing. This wasn't a hasty advance. This was a deliberate push by a competent enemy who knew American forces were in the area and was prepared for contact. Range check, Morrison ordered. Parker called out measurements. Lead King Tiger 2950 yards, second King Tiger 2940, column moving 5 miles per hour. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. 2950 yards was beyond anything they had attempted, almost exactly 2 miles. At that distance, even minor errors in calculation would result in misses. Can you make a shot at that range? Parker was quiet for a moment, calculating rapidly. Theoretically, yes, but margin for error is minimal. Wind is variable at that distance. Temperature gradients affect the trajectory. Any small mistake, and I miss completely. Morrison looked at the column below, at the thousands of civilians who would die if that armor reached Marsh, at his crew who trusted him to make the right tactical decisions. How confident are you 50-50 on the first shot? If I can see the impact and adjust maybe 70% on the second. Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Take the shot. Hayes's voice came over the radio. Morrison, you're engaging at that range. Affirmative. Parker says he can make it. That's almost 2 miles. I know, sir. But if we wait for them to close, we lose the advantage. At this range, they can't effectively return fire. Hayes was quiet for 3 seconds. Your call, Sergeant. But if you miss that column, we'll scatter and we'll never get clear shots again. Understood? Morrison turned to his crew. This is the most important shot we've ever taken. Parker, take your time. Get it right. Walsh, be ready for rapid reloading. We'll need to fire multiple shots quickly. Both men nodded. Parker began his final calculations. Wind speed 12 miles per hour quartering from the left. Temperature 32 degrees exactly. Air density at this elevation. Target speed and direction. The mathematics were more complex than anything he had calculated before. Morrison watched him work, seeing the absolute concentration. This was what Parker had been training for since Bobby died. Every hour studying ballistics in the Detroit library, every calculation in his notebook, every practice shot, all of it leading to this moment. Parker adjusted the gun with microscopic precision. Range 2950, elevation 16.4 degrees, windage 4.2 mils left, lead 22 feet for target movement. He paused, checking and rechecking his calculations on the way. The 90mm gun fired. The shell flew for 3.7 seconds. Morrison counted every one, knowing that 4,000 lives depended on Parker's mathematics being perfect. The shell struck the lead King Tiger's mantlet, the thickest armor on the entire vehicle. Sparks flew. The armor held. No penetration. Morrison's heart sank. A miss at this range would scatter the column and waste their perfect firing position. But Parker was already adjusting, having watched the impact point through his gun sight. Saw the hit. Angle was bad. Targets turning, exposing side armor. Adjusting 2 mils right, 1 degree down. Firing. The second shot flew before Morrison could respond. This time the mathematics aligned with physics perfectly. The shell struck the King Tiger's side armor at an angle that maximized penetration. The armor breached. Internal ammunition detonated. The explosion was visible even at nearly 2 miles. The turret lifted off the hull and tumbled through the air before crashing down 30 feet away. Secondary explosions continued as remaining ammunition cooked off. The German column stopped confusion, spreading through their ranks like poison. Hayes now, Morrison ordered into the radio. Hayes's M36 fired at the second King Tiger using Parker's range data. The shot was good, striking the side armor and immobilizing the tank. Not a catastrophic kill, but enough to block the narrow valley road. Parker was already tracking the third King Tiger, range 2940, target attempting to reverse, calculating. His hands moved through the adjustments with practiced efficiency. The third shot flew true, striking the reversing King Tiger in its weaker rear armor. Another catastrophic kill, another massive explosion. The German column dissolved into chaos. Infantry abandoned the tanks, scrambling for any cover in the open valley. Panthers scattered, firing wildly toward the ridge, but falling short by hundreds of yards. The Panzer IVs attempted to reverse, but crashed into vehicles behind them. Morrison counted seconds, knowing German artillery would respond soon. Parker, one more. Fourth King Tiger. The fourth German heavy tank was attempting to maneuver behind cover, its commander finally understanding they were being engaged from extreme range. But the valley offered limited concealment. Parker tracked it through his sight, range increasing 2970, target speed 8 miles per hour, calculating. This was the shot that would either prove Parker's methods or reveal their limitations. A moving target at the extreme end of the gun's effective range, variables compounding upon variables. Parker made his adjustments and fired. Morrison watched through binoculars as the shell approached the moving King Tiger. For a moment, he thought it would miss passing behind the moving target, but Parker had calculated the lead perfectly. The shell struck the King Tiger's side armor just behind the turret. Penetration, ammunition detonation, fourth catastrophic kill in less than 3 minutes. The German column was broken, 4 King Tigers destroyed, Panthers scattered, infantry pinned down. the road to Marsh blocked by burning wrecks. Morrison heard German artillery shells whistling inbound. All units displaced now. Both M36s reversed rapidly from their firing positions. German artillery impacted exactly where they had been 30 seconds earlier. The bombardment was intense, accurate, deadly. If they had delayed even 15 seconds, they would all be dead. They relocated 400 yards to a secondary position, breathing hard, processing what they had accomplished. Hayes's voice on the radio was shaken. Morrison, did you just kill 4 King Tigers in 3 minutes from almost 2 miles away? Affirmative, sir. Parker made 4 shots, 4 hits. That's impossible. Tell that to the Germans. They held their secondary position for 2 hours, watching the German column's disintegration through binoculars. Recovery vehicles attempted to reach the destroyed tanks, but were driven off by American artillery that Hayes had finally managed to coordinate. Infantry assaults toward the ridge were repelled by the 30 American soldiers who had been their only support. By 1700 hours, the German attack had stalled completely. The column retreated, leaving their dead and their destroyed vehicles behind. 4 King Tigers, 3 Panthers, multiple lighter vehicles, all destroyed or abandoned. The road to Marsh remained closed. 4,000 civilians would live to see Christmas, but the cost was becoming apparent. During the artillery bombardment, shrapnel from a near miss had torn through the open turret. Walsh had been struck in the arm, a gash that bled heavily but wasn't life-threatening. Morrison applied a field dressing, while the kid tried not to cry from pain and shock and the emotional crash after hours of sustained combat. You did good, Tommy. Kept loading even when the artillery was falling. That took real courage. Walsh's hands shook as Morrison wrapped the bandage. I thought we were dead. When those shells started landing, I thought that was it. So did I, but we moved fast enough. Parker's shooting bought us the time we needed. Morrison looked at his gunner, who sat staring at his notebook with a strange expression. Something had changed in Parker during the engagement. The theoretical had become brutally real. 4 tanks destroyed in 3 minutes meant dozens of German crew members killed. The mathematics of death made flesh. Jimmy, you okay? Parker looked up, his eyes distant. I just killed maybe 20 men in 3 minutes. 20 men who probably had families, brothers, people who loved them. Morrison sat down beside him. You also saved 4,000 civilians, saved our infantry, stopped a German breakthrough that could have extended this war by months. Parker closed his notebook slowly. I know, intellectually I know, but Bobby used to say that every death diminishes us, that we should remember the humanity of the people we kill even when killing them is necessary. Morrison had no easy answers. He had been wrestling with the same questions since Jake Sullivan burned to death in front of him. Your brother was right. We should remember, but we also have to keep doing our jobs because the alternative is worse. Hayes approached his face, showing the strain of the day. Battalion commander wants to see all of you. There's talk of medals, official commendations. Morrison stood wearily. We don't need medals, sir. We need ammunition and a few hours of sleep. Hayes smiled grimly. You'll get both, but you're also getting recognition whether you want it or not. What you did today. Morrison, that's going to change how the Army fights. Parker's methods, your tactical decisions, they're being written up as doctrine even as we speak. Parker spoke quietly. Sir, I don't want recognition. I just want to go home. Hayes' expression softened. We all do, Corporal, but first we have to win this war, and you just helped us do that. Over the next 6 days, between December 26th and December 31st, Morrison's crew continued their deadly work. The engagements blurred together in memory. A King Tiger ambushed near Houffalize, 2 Panthers destroyed in a running firefight near La Roche. Another King Tiger immobilized at extreme range, abandoned by its crew when American infantry closed in. Not every shot was perfect. Parker missed twice when wind conditions changed unexpectedly once they had to withdraw under heavy artillery fire without confirming a kill. But the overall pattern held: extreme range engagement, first shot advantage, rapid displacement. The Germans never saw them clearly, never pinned them down, never got close enough to bring their superior armor to bear. By New Year's Eve, Morrison's crew had destroyed 10 King Tigers and 5 Panthers. Parker's accuracy rate stood at 87%, remarkable for the extreme ranges at which they operated. They had taken no casualties from enemy fire, though Walsh's shrapnel wound from Christmas Day was still healing. But Walsh was no longer with them. On December 27th, the medics who had dressed his arm noticed something wrong: unequal pupils, difficulty focusing, confusion about basic facts. The shrapnel that grazed his skull had caused a concussion more serious than anyone initially realized. Morrison made the hard decision. Tommy, you're going to the aid station. Get that head checked properly, Walsh protested weakly. Sarge, the crew needs a loader. Morrison put a hand on the kid's shoulder. The crew needs you healthy. You've done your part. More than your part. Let the doctors make sure you're okay. That's an order. After Walsh was evacuated, Corporal Marcus Bennett from Hayes's crew volunteered as replacement. Bennett was 25 from Kentucky, a steady hand who had been studying Parker's methods during the training sessions. He was experienced, calm under fire, and asked intelligent questions about the ballistics calculations. But Morrison missed Walsh's enthusiasm. The farm kid's transformation from terrified boy to competent soldier had been one of the few positive things to emerge from this brutal battle. On the morning of January 1st, 1945, Morrison's crew received orders for what would become their most famous engagement. A King Tiger sat in a defensive position, blocking the main road into March. German engineers had created a strong point around it with infantry in prepared positions and anti-tank guns covering the approaches. Standard American doctrine would have called for artillery bombardment, followed by infantry assault, but ammunition was scarce and casualties were already too high. Hayes briefed Morrison personally. That King Tiger has to go. The road has to open. Can Parker make the shot? Morrison studied the map. Range to target 2,980 yards, almost exactly 2 miles, the longest shot they had ever attempted. I don't know, sir. That's beyond anything we've done. Hayes met his eyes. Morrison, in the last 9 days, your crew has destroyed 10 King Tigers and 5 Panthers. You've changed this entire battle. If anyone can make this shot, it's Parker. Morrison found Parker studying the terrain through binoculars, already calculating. What do you think? Jimmy Parker was quiet for a long moment. 2,980 yards. Wind variable, maybe 10 to 12 miles per hour. Target stationary but partially hull down, only turret exposed. Temperature 32 degrees, right at freezing. He paused, running numbers in his head. It's possible. Margin for error is razor thin, but possible. Morrison made the decision. Set it up. We take the shot. They positioned carefully, using every scrap of cover the terrain offered. Bennett loaded shells with quiet efficiency. Parker created new range cards for this unprecedented distance, checking and rechecking his calculations. Morrison watched through binoculars as Parker worked. The young gunner's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the gun by fractions of degrees. This was the culmination of everything Bobby had asked him to do. Find a way to hit them from farther away. Parker couldn't get any farther away than this. Ready, Parker finally said. Morrison keyed the radio. Hayes Morrison were taking the shot. Good hunting. Parker adjusted the gun one final time. Range 2,980 yards. Elevation 16.8 degrees. Windage 4.5 mils left. Target stationary. He paused, checking one last time. On the way. The 90-millimeter gun fired. The shell flew for 3.8 seconds. Morrison counted every one, knowing that this shot would either cement their legend or prove the limits of what mathematics could accomplish. The shell struck the King Tiger's mantlet, the thickest armor on the entire vehicle. Sparks flew. The armor held no penetration. Damn it, Morrison whispered. But Parker was already adjusting, saw the impact, angle wrong, waiting for movement. They waited. 30 seconds, a minute. The German crew inside the King Tiger was probably reporting the impact, trying to figure out where it had come from. At nearly 2 miles, they would have no idea. Then the King Tiger's turret began to rotate, scanning for threats. Now, Parker said, side turret exposure. He adjusted 2 mils and fired again. This shot also hit but failed to penetrate, striking at a bad angle against the curved turret armor. Parker's jaw tightened. 2 shots, 2 failures. Morrison could see the frustration building. One more Jimmy. Third time. Parker made another adjustment, compensating for what he had learned from the first 2 impacts. The King Tiger's turret continued its slow rotation, giving him a slightly different angle. The third shot flew true. It struck the King Tiger's turret at the perfect angle where the armor was slightly thinner and the curve worked against deflection. The shell punched through. Internal ammunition detonated. The explosion was smaller than previous kills, more controlled, but just as deadly. The King Tiger's turret stopped moving. Smoke poured from the hatches. German infantry began abandoning their positions, realizing their strongest defensive asset had just been destroyed from an impossible distance. Morrison watched through binoculars as American infantry began their advance. The road to Marsh was open. Hayes' voice came over the radio, awed. Morrison, did you just kill a King Tiger from 2,980 yards? Confirmed, sir. 3 shots, third one got him. That's the longest confirmed tank kill in this war, maybe the longest ever. Morrison looked at Parker, who was staring at his notebook. The young gunner's hands were shaking. Jimmy Parker looked up, tears in his eyes. I did it, Sarge. I kept my promise to Bobby. I found a way to hit them from farther away. Morrison put a hand on his shoulder. You did more than that. You changed how we fight this war. But even as Morrison said it, he felt nothing except exhaustion. No pride, no satisfaction, just the grim knowledge that they had done their job one more time. The Battle of the Bulge was ending. German fuel supplies were exhausted. Allied air power had returned with clear skies. The offensive was collapsing across the entire front. Morrison's crew had played their part. 3 ordinary Americans with a gun, a notebook, and the mathematics to turn distance into death. They had proven that invincibility was an illusion, that every strength had a weakness, that sometimes intelligence and precision defeated brute force. The Germans had believed their heavy armor made them unstoppable. Morrison's crew had shattered that belief with cold determination and perfect calculations. Over the following week, the fighting gradually subsided. German units retreated, leaving behind their destroyed vehicles and their dead. American forces pushed forward, cautiously reclaiming ground lost in the first desperate days of December. Morrison's crew fired their last shots on January 7th. A Panther attempting to cover a German retreat, range 2,400 yards. Parker's first shot hit perfectly, a clean kill. It felt routine, now almost mechanical. By January 15th, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion assembled for the first time in weeks. Morrison looked at the survivors and saw the exhaustion in every face. They had all aged years in a month. Lieutenant Colonel Harris addressed them personally. Gentlemen, I want you to understand what you accomplished. In 4 weeks of fighting, this battalion destroyed 19 German King Tigers, 14 Panthers, and numerous lighter vehicles. You held critical positions. You delayed German advances. You saved countless American lives. He paused, looking directly at Morrison. Sergeant Morrison's crew alone accounted for 11 King Tigers and 6 Panthers. Corporal Parker achieved an 87% hit rate at ranges exceeding 2,500 yards. These are numbers that will be studied for generations. Morrison felt the weight of every eye on him. He didn't want this attention. He just wanted to go home. Harris continued, your methods are being incorporated into tank destroyer doctrine. The Parker ballistic system is being taught at Fort Hood. What you proved in these forests, what you bought with blood and courage, will change how America fights armored warfare forever. After the formation dismissed, Morrison found Parker sitting alone by their M36, touching the gun barrel like saying goodbye to an old friend. They're sending us home, Jimmy. Rotation orders came through. We're going stateside to train new crews. Parker nodded slowly. Bobby would have liked that. Me, teaching others how to do what he asked. Morrison sat down beside him. You kept your promise, more than kept it. Parker pulled out Bobby's photo, studied it one last time, then carefully tucked it back into his wallet. I'm going to keep this with me every day to remember what the cost was. The cost wasn't just Bobby Morrison thought. It was the German crews they had killed, the American soldiers who had died while they lived, the piece of themselves they had left behind in these frozen forests. But they had survived. Against impossible odds, they had come home. Cleveland, Ohio, June 1946. Morrison stood in his father's old garage, now his garage, breathing in the familiar scent of motor oil and metal. The war had been over for a year. He had kept his promise to his mother. He had come home alive. The door opened and Parker walked in carrying a bag of tools. Morrison had hired him 6 months ago. Neither of them talked about the war often. They didn't need to. Parker had stopped having nightmares about the German crews he'd killed. Mostly. Morrison had stopped seeing Jake Sullivan burn every time he closed his eyes. Mostly. They worked together in comfortable silence, fixing cars, solving mechanical problems, living civilian lives they had once thought they might never see again. A customer came in, an elderly woman with a troubled engine. As Morrison diagnosed the problem, she noticed the small photograph on his workbench. Morrison in uniform, standing with Parker and Walsh beside an M36 Jackson. Is that you? In the war? Morrison nodded. My son was at Bastonia, she said quietly. Infantry. He told me about the tank killers who stopped the Germans. He said they saved his life. Morrison didn't know what to say. He never did when people thanked him. I'm glad he made it home, ma'am. After she left, Parker spoke up from where he was working on another car. You ever regret it? What we did, Morrison thought about the question carefully. No, I regret the necessity of it. I regret that men had to die, but I don't regret keeping my promise. I don't regret bringing us home. Parker nodded, understanding. The door opened again, and Walsh walked in, home on leave from engineering school. The concussion had healed completely. He was studying mechanical engineering at Iowa State on the GI Bill, coming home a man instead of the scared boy who had left. Hey, Sarge. Jimmy. Got time to look at my car? Morrison smiled. Always got time, Tommy. The three of them worked together through the afternoon, fixing Walsh's troubled engine, telling old stories, carefully not mentioning the things that still woke them at night. They had become the ghosts that haunted German nightmares. They had changed the nature of armored warfare with mathematics and precision. They had proven that sometimes the deadliest weapon wasn't the strongest one, but the one the enemy never saw coming. But that was behind them now. They were home. They were alive, and they were building lives that meant something beyond death and destruction. Morrison looked at Parker and Walsh, these men who had become his brothers in ways his actual brother never had the chance to be. They had survived together, they had kept each other alive, and they carried the weight of that survival with quiet dignity. No medals on their walls, no glory in their stories, just three ordinary Americans who had done extraordinary things because the moment demanded it. The M36 Jackson was retired from service in 1956. Parker's ballistics methodology became classified doctrine studied at military schools for decades. The record of 2,980 yards stood as the longest confirmed tank versus tank kill in American military history until the Gulf War of 1991. But Morrison, Parker, and Walsh never spoke publicly about their service.